Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for Field to Market's second research showcase. These showcases offer the opportunity for our members to learn about current science that can inform impactful sustainability supply chain projects. I'm Kelly Murray Young, Senior Director of Education and Inclusion at Field to Market, and I'm excited to kick off today's event. However, before we do get started, I just wanted to share a few logistics. First, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our website. All attendees' microphones are muted and your videos have been turned off, but we do ask that you enter your questions for each speaker in the Q&A box on your screen. Following each speaker's presentation, we'll have about 5 minutes to address your questions. Today, we will learn from Dr. Linda Prokopy, Professor and Department Head of Horticulture and Landscape Architecture at Purdue University, and she's going to share with us her ongoing work to enhance rural resilience through landscape diversity in the Midwest. Next, we'll hear from Marina Duarte. She is Assistant Extension Director at the Educator at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, who will share how she has used the Fieldprint calculator to encourage conservation practices among farmers. And finally, Danielle Isaacson, Program Manager at the Minnesota Agricultural Water Quality Certification Program. Danielle will share a recent study analyzing the financial data of producers who implement whole farm conservations. Now, without any further ado, please help me welcome Dr. Prokopy.
Thanks, Kelly. Good morning, everyone. I am going to be talking this morning about a large USDA NIFA-funded project called the Diverse Corn Belt Project, and give you just an overview of this project. It is a 5-year project. Then we have just finished year 3, so we're well underway. It's a number of different partners on this project, as you can see in this slide here. Lots of different universities across the Midwest, several NGOs involved, a couple of federal agencies. We also have a diversity of advisory committee members, and we really represent a broad swath of science and practical expertise on the team. I, as the project lead, am a social scientist, and so I'm mostly going to be talking to you about I'm basically only going to talk to you about our social science findings this morning, but I encourage you to look further for other information coming out of our project. The premise of our project is that our current system, which is basically across the Corn Belt, and we're focused on the 3 I states, Indiana, Illinois, and Iowa, that it's basically a monoculture of corn and soybeans. And there's a lot of evidence in the literature that shifting agricultural systems towards greater diversity, both on farm, at the landscape level, and in agricultural markets, can lead to greater resilience. But we don't actually really know how to transform from the current system that we have in the Midwest to a more transformed system that has more resilient diversification at all of these different levels. And so through our 5-year project, we are looking to better understand different pathways that can help us get to a more diverse system, but also different impacts of that diverse system, both in terms of social impacts, socioeconomic impacts on farmers and communities, but also impacts on the larger environment. So through our project, we are trying to generate visions and frameworks to inform shifts to more diversified agriculture. And the goal of our project is to identify and address barriers, outline pathways to systems that are more resilient and more sustainable across all of the 3 typical forms of sustainability: economics, social, and environmental. And again, our geographic focus is the 3 I states. Briefly, how are we defining diversification? We're defining diversification at 3 different levels: farm, market, and landscape level. At the farm level, we are considering a farm or a field to be diverse if it does one of the following: if it incorporates small grains and or forage crops into rotation with corn and soybeans, if it incorporates perennial forage or bioenergy crops, agroforestry, horticultural food crops, and or grazed livestock. We are hoping to figure out how to develop a diversity of markets that meet needs of diverse people across the entire value chain, and that ultimately at the landscape level, wide-scale adoption of different types of farming systems that are climate smart and help reach profit and yield goals and ecosystem services goals lead to more resiliency and equitable distribution of systems and services. We have many facets, as you would expect, in a large complex project with a number of different partners. Collectively, we have 6 objectives. So we are doing something that we call co-production, which my partner, J.R. Buckle at Iowa State, who I'm sure some of you know, defines co-production as working with key stakeholder partners to come up with great ideas. And that's exactly what we're doing. We know that sitting in our universities and our nonprofit offices, et cetera, we don't have the answers. We're just trying to facilitate conversations to try and understand what answers might be. So we're doing this through a series of different ways of connecting and talking to farmers and other ag stakeholders, which I will talk about in this presentation. We're also doing on-farm research and generally just trying to understand readiness for the system to change. Our second objective involves modeling, looking at different impacts of different land use scenarios on farm level economics, land use change, water quality, et cetera. We're doing visioning with farmers and ag stakeholders. We will be developing policy guidance and engaging with stakeholders in terms of outreach and trying to figure out how to diversify markets. And then all of this sort of wrapped around with education. So we also have a component that's doing high school education and college level education through developing different modules about diversification. So zooming in on this first objective of co-production, one of the pieces that we are doing is on-farm research at a number of different farms that you can sort of see generally geographically represented here across the 3 I-states. We're looking at biophysical processes in conventional and diversified cropping systems to understand how diversification can shift different outcomes of agro-ecosystem functioning. So these are real farms, these are real farmers who are partnering with us to do this. We're looking at, of course, more traditional corn soybean fields, but also different representatives of the different types of land uses that we're interested in. So different crops in rotation, agroforestry, perennials, horticultural food crops, and grazed livestock. And we're looking at water quality outcomes, soil health outcomes, and pest outcomes, especially focusing on beneficial insects as we're looking at the entomological part of this project. So we have collected 2 years worth of data now on these farms. So those teams are busy analyzing that data, and it's a little premature to be sharing those results yet, but stay tuned because those will be forthcoming. We are also doing have done a farmer survey, and you can see the poll that just popped up on your screen. I'm curious to see what you think in terms of which types of systems are better diversified or specialized systems for meeting different outcomes. And so you have a chance here to answer some of the questions that we asked the farmers, and we'll see how your results compare. So we mailed this survey out beginning of last year, 2023, to 3,300 farmers across the 3 I-states, and we intentionally sampled to get more diverse farmers. So what that means is normally when we do a survey, we do a random sample and we can say we can generalize our results to all farmers. In this case, because of our sampling strategy, we're representing more diversified farmers than specialized farmers, and that's just an important point to consider as you see the one question I'm going to show you results from today. So we had a 23% response rate. Folks have been farming for quite a long time, average of 40 years, with an average age of 65, various levels of education, as you can see here. And again, because of the way we sampled, 60% of the folks in our sample said they were using at least one of those 5 practices that we have identified. All right, now what we didn't test was how I see the poll results. So there they are, perfect, look at that. All right, so this is great. So you all think that diversified systems are especially good at conserving land, soil, water, wildlife, habitat, increasing resilience, managing pests and diseases, and decreasing down there in terms of quality of life for farmers and feeding an increasing population, where you're thinking that specialized systems are better for local jobs, quality of life, and feeding an increasing population. So let's take a look at what our farmers said, and I only gave you a sampling of our questions, but what you see here is the orange bar are the diversified systems and blue bar is specialized. So farmers saying which system's better able to do these things. So like you, farmers think that diversified systems are better for conserving land, soil, water, and wildlife habitat. We asked them about 2 types of shocks. They think diversified is better for environmental and economic shocks. and slightly more of them thinking that diversified systems are better for managing weeds, pests, and diseases. They also think that diversified systems are better for managing yield impacts of changing climatic conditions. And continuing, they think diversified systems are better for improving health and nutrition, creating local jobs, which differs from our audience here today, enhancing quality of life for farmers, and managing generational changes on the farm. The one question that farmers did not think diversified systems were better was feeding an increasing population, with a majority of farmers there, or 46%, thinking that specialized systems are better for feeding an increasing population, which corresponds with what you all thought as well. All right, so surveys are very static. Obviously, they're very it's a one-way flow of information, very helpful, very informative. We have a lot more data out of the survey, obviously, that you will see in coming years. But we have also done a number of focus groups. So we did 20 focus groups with farmers, both conventional farmers and farmers who are interested in diversifying, and farmers who had already diversified, and really asking them what's working for them in the current system, what's not working, what's working if they diversified, what isn't working, etc. We've also done interviews with diversified farmers to better understand pathways, drivers, and barriers to diversification. And we are doing something we're calling Reimagining Agricultural Diversity, or RAD teams. And I'll talk about those quite a bit here in a few minutes. First, focus groups. We have this is the first paper really coming out of the project, and we have published the results of these focus groups, looking at what farmers themselves are saying about diversification across the 3 ice states. We found a number of barriers to diversification emerge through these focus groups. So barriers in terms of economics and markets, time involved, labor involved, need for land, and need for different inputs. And of course, barriers in terms of crop insurance. And one of the, the quotes we use a lot from these focus groups is, growing corn and soybeans is easy. It's like pushing the easy button, and it's a barrier to think about changing into something more complex. However, farmers also saw a number of opportunities for diversification, opportunities in terms of new markets emerging, diversifying sources of income, developing new networks and relationships, and soil health benefits from diversification. Obviously, a lot more there. If anyone's interested in a copy of the paper, it's open access, but if you can't find it, feel free to send me an email. But I want to zoom in here on these RAD teams that we're doing. We've gathered one team in each state, and they're meeting twice a year, and we're sort of moving our location around the states as we meet. We have invited intentionally folks who we think are going to be creative thinkers and problem solvers from across the ag spectrum to these meetings. So of course we have farmers at the meetings. We also have various different types of advisors. We have extension folks in the room. We've even invited county economic development people, trying to really sort of cover a gamut of people in the room. And I think in Iowa, we have a crop insurance salesperson who's attending as well, which is fantastic. So we are doing a number of different facilitated activities to really drill down into these challenges and pathways and ideas to enable a diverse Corn Belt in these meetings. So one activity that we have done, we call it a priority sort, where we gave people a number of different cards of statements, and these statements were statements that came up in our focus groups. So we're sort of giving those statements back to people and saying, okay, which of these are more or less important to you? And as people sort these cards, they say which ones they most agree with, which ones they most disagree with. We then ask them to put stickers on the statements that they agreed with, didn't agree with. And what you see here in this big picture is red stickers they put on the statements, the 3 statements they most disagreed with, and green where they most agreed. What emerges out of this is a clear sort of picture of consensus, but also if you zoom in here, you start to see somewhere like this one over here where there's a lot of red stickers, a lot of disagreement, but also a couple of people who agreed. And those lead to really interesting conversations, very respectful conversations, but very interesting conversations to really start to get at what's going on in people's minds, what's happening in these communities. So some of the big picture findings. One of the statements in all 3 of our states that emerged as a strongly agree statement: within the next 20 years or so, I'd like farms in my region to be part of a vibrant community with services to sustain people who live and visit, such as grocery stores, restaurants, farmers markets, and educational opportunities. And when we have folks then discuss those statements, one of the things they said at a small group discussion was, if we don't talk about community, I don't know why the rest of this conversation matters. I personally find that to be a very profound statement. I have it actually taped on my wall in my office as a motivational statement for myself. One of the statements folks most disagreed with across the 3 states is, within the next 20 years, I'd like farms in my region to merge into large-scale commodity operations capable of taking advantage of specialization and economies of scale. And one of the common refrains in the discussion of that is, I want to see more farming families be viable, and consolidation is the opposite of that. So we start to see this theme of folks really wanting vibrant communities, wanting to make sure there's still family farms. And that's not really what our landscape is trending towards as we move forward in the status quo. We also have done a series of different table activities asking folks what ag diversity currently looks like, where diversification makes sense. You can see here in their states, folks thinking ag diversity, of course, lots of corn and soybeans, but other things that they're starting to see popping up in their states, ranging from small grains and perennials to pumpkins and agritourism. Does diversification make sense? Some lively discussions around that, yes, but it's complicated. Often folks saying it needs to add to what we're already doing, not replace it, which I think our team would fully agree with. We don't envision a landscape that doesn't have corn and soybeans, but adds more to that landscape for more resiliency. Where does it make sense? Folks talking about some of the biophysical parameters of that around soil and crop suitability, but also proximity to markets, proximity to urban centers, what is needed to succeed, financial and policy support coming up a lot, markets coming up a lot, need for information, advisor buy-in, lots of common trends and themes coming up in those conversations. We did another activity where we asked folks what they want to see in a changed landscape, and folks wrote on these Post-it notes and stuck them on the wall, and we grouped them. Pretty common type of activity at these types of meetings. If we zoom in here, just to sort of reiterate, it's very similar themes coming up across different activities. This is a picture from Illinois, but folks wanting increased small town vitality, increased size of rural graduating classes, broader access to fresh, healthy food, more people working on the land, vibrant small town main streets, lots of consistent trends that I think help us understand more of what the direction we should be trying to take our ag policy, et cetera. The final activity we did at the end of our second meeting was we actually had these AI generated images developed by one of our graduate students on the project to actually show people what a different landscape could look like. And we had an activity where they then got to say, and you'll see that here, what they like in those pictures and what they didn't like in those pictures. And we're currently analyzing what folks said to get a better handle around what people would potentially like the landscape to look like, that we can then feed into the different models, et cetera, to see what all of that would mean in terms of economics, water quality, food shed types of parameters, et cetera. So where we're at with this, we finished our first meetings, which is sort of this baseline visioning. Yes, Kelly.
No, please go ahead.
Okay. Our next meetings will be really action planning. So what's come up at these meetings consistently is the need for market access and the need for different policies. So we're going to spend our next meetings really, really drilling down into what does that look like and what type of support is needed for that. And then hopefully in the 5th year of our project, co-producing documents, looking at state level recommendations. So again, not just us sitting in our offices, but really working with the folks on the ground who are living this reality and really know what they want to stay the same and what they would like to change. So with that, I will end. If you would like to learn more about our project, sign up for our newsletter, et cetera. There's the QR code, and obviously you're very welcome to contact me for further information.
Thank you so much, Lyndon. Please, if you do have any questions for Dr. Prokopy, enter them into the QA box there on the bottom of your screen. But I actually have a question. You had mentioned how so many people really stress the importance of a vibrant community.
Mm-hmm.
We know that agriculture happens in communities. Farms are in communities.
Mm-hmm.
People live in communities. And I'm just curious, as field and market starts exploring social metrics, some interest in healthy, vibrant communities. That's one of the really important pillars. And so do you have any thoughts just off the top of your head about how field to market members might help support vibrant communities? Are there things that they can be thinking about right now that they can take back to their organization and say, this is something that we might be able to do to help?
That is a great question. I'm not sure what the answer is. I do think a diversity of crops help with that, because it does generate more employment opportunities, right? And we see just fewer and fewer people in our rural communities. And so certainly, I think one of the issues we run into is that we grow corn and soybeans really, really well. Right? Because we have done research on how to grow corn and soybeans really, really well for decades. And we've dropped off research into other crops in the Corn Belt. And so when people say, for example, you can't grow oats in Indiana, well, is that really true? Or is it just that we haven't actually been, breeding oats that grow in Indiana, right? And we haven't been putting research dollars into that, right? And into those markets. We certainly know there's, oats are sort of an interesting example, with a lot of companies actually wanting US sourced oats, right, for their own marketing, for their consumer demand, et cetera. And yet we can't grow enough oats because we don't know how to grow the oats, right? So I think just more openness to researching different types of crops and being open to working with farmers to experiment, and helping farmers when they're experimenting with the risk of experimenting, right? There's a lot of risk in experimenting, right? Very, very real economic risks for farmers that we need to be supporting, I think.
That's great. Sharing risk is an important part of our Fieldprint projects. Like, how can we help share that risk to minimize any potential losses for them? That's beautiful. We had a couple of questions come in. So has anyone looked at manure as a fertility source for diversity? Does that fit into the equation, the use of manure?
Well, so indirectly with fields where we're looking at with grazed livestock, of course, right, where we would certainly have there be manure on the land that will feed into what the on-field team is learning about soil health, et cetera, on that land. Other than that, no, we are not looking at that directly. And I'm sure there are researchers somewhere who are doing that, though I just don't know them. So yeah.
Jenny, thank you for this incredible overview. And she's wondering, are there any specific markets that you think are viable in those ice states that you're focusing on, or is that part of your next steps in looking at those specific viable markets?
So it's very much part of next steps, right? Because we do want to be doing this sort of in partnership again with the farmers and what they're interested in. But I think there's some early signs, certainly some small grains are a clear market potential, oats, wheat, et cetera. We grow a surprising number of horticultural food crops in the Midwest that people don't necessarily know about, right? We grow a lot of processing tomatoes, for example. We used to grow green beans for processing. We have the ability to do that, right? With much less water, much less impact than you're seeing in places like California, where we grow most of the food that we eat. And so I think there's possibilities for really opening that up and thinking, can we do that? And can we do that better than other parts of the country that are currently doing those things, and create more internal resiliency and sustainability? I mean, there was just an article this morning, right, worrying about strikes at the docks, right, and what that's going to do to our food supply. Well, if we grew more of the food that we ate, we wouldn't have to worry so much about that. So yeah. But again, I'm not going to be the one who sits here and says what I think those markets should be and what people want to grow, right? I think that needs to very much be in dialogue with our stakeholders.
Yep, from the ground up, right? Literally.
Yes.
Cassidy says that she's in central Illinois, where most of the corn soybean producers rent their ground. So I do a lot of work on rented land in this work. So that seems to be a big barrier to diversifying. So how can we look at those landowners and how do they fit into these models?
Cassidy, rented land. Yes, that's a whole other body of work. So the landowners are not a homogenous group. right? And we struggle to reach them. We struggle with that, even just thinking about trying to get cover crops adopted, right? How do we reach landowners? How do we convince them this is a good idea and they should be in partnership with their tenant? So I think those same struggles are the same. I think diversification for some landowners would actually be really appealing. And I think it's probably working with tenants, quite frankly, to help craft those messages as they're communicating with their landowners. We've found sort of going around tenants tenants don't like it, but also the landowners aren't necessarily very receptive to that, right? They'd rather have a request, but then the tenants don't know what to say and don't have the information. So I think more partnership there with tenants to help them communicate what they'd like to do.
Communication is key to all of this work, isn't it?
Yes.
And then finally, we have a question from Chelsea asking, can you speak more on the decision to focus on innovative and diverse producers compared to those middle to late adopters? And do you think the front line forward or to move the back of the pack forward is a more efficient? Everybody's worried about the middle and late adopters.
Right. Yes. Yes. So we had a number of conversations about that, as I'm sure you can imagine, in our project team when we were thinking about who to invite to these RAD team meetings. And because diversification is such a new concept, we really decided to focus on the folks who want to have a conversation. Because if we try to have a conversation on diversification with people who don't want to have the conversation, it's just not very helpful, right? But recognizing, of course, that a lot more work needs to be done, right? This is really sort of the first wave. I'm hoping the first wave of really talking about diversification in the Midwest, and that there'll be a whole lot more work that happens that does then include the middle to late adopters. But we need to have more innovators and early adopters to even showcase what can be done before we go out to middle and late adopters. So yeah, I think very, very different than when we're trying to promote something like cover crops, where we do already have the innovators and early adopters.
So if we have those strong pull, it'll make the push a little bit here, right?
Hopefully,
To move
hopefully, yes, yes. Theory would tell us so, yes.
Thank you so much for this. We
Yes,
really
of course.
appreciate your sharing. Thank you for sharing that QR code so folks can learn more. Appreciate it so much, Dr. Prokopy.
Yeah, thank you.
Now we're going to focus our attention to Marina Duarte, who's going to share her work going on that she's done with a Fieldprint calculator. Take it away, Marina.
Can you see it?
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So I'm Marina Duarte, and I'm working right now as water and crop extension educator in the University of Nebraska. And I just started in January, and I did my master in Auburn University. And it was there that I was introduced to field to market and Fieldprint calculator. And it was when me and my advisor, we thought about using these to do one of my chapters to evaluate the use of the Fieldprint calculator as a tool to access progress towards conservation agriculture among farmers. And so this is the work that I did in my master, not what I'm working with right now. However, I want to keep working with this, so I'm gonna present what I did, okay? So why sustainable agriculture is so important nowadays? As we know, this is a farming method to meet the food, fiber, and other products demand while preserving natural resources. But we also need to think about the farmer and how this can be profitable for them, so they can want to keep doing and using sustainable practices, right? However, the adoption of sustainability in agriculture is still remain low, especially because of social pressures, cultural beliefs, and sometimes lack of positive examples, which leads to farmers to feel discouraged to adopt new methods. And farmers also face challenge in balance productivity and sustainability, because at the same time, this is their work, their life. So they need to be profitable, they still need to be environmentally good and socially responsible. However, collaborative efforts, agricultural extension services, and multi-stakeholder initiatives like the Field to Market help to promote sustainability through metrics and data-driven approaches, which leads farmers to understand better what they are doing and to have a better risk perception of the adoptions that they can start having or not. So talking a little bit about the Fieldprint calculator, it's a tool from Field to Market, and it's very interesting because it's the Field to Market, which what I like is that is a diverse membership sector that bring together university, agribusiness, growers, conservation groups, public sectors, thinking about everyone involved in this market. And the Fieldprint calculator enables farmers to compare their sustainability score against benchmarkers, which helps farmers to be more visual and about their score and be more curious about how they are doing. So the objective of my study was to identify possible applications and benefits associated with the use of sustainability indicators and to identify opportunities and barriers using these indicators. So this is an example of parts of the report that the Fieldprint calculator gives in the end of inputting the results. And I like to show this, how it's an example of this to the farmers before starting collecting the data, so they can see how the data is going to be presented and they feel more comfortable in sharing the information. Because even though some of them doesn't mind in sharing and they like to share, some of them get a little more reserved about that, saying that those informations, it's kind of their bank account, so they don't wanna, they feel a little afraid to share things. But once I showed them how the data is presented and how we don't use their name, we were using codes and numbers, they were feeling more comfortable in sharing those. And I also was explaining them the indicators, saying that the calculator can show scores on 8 different metrics like land use, irrigation water use, greenhouse gas emissions, energy use, soil conservation, soil carbon, water quality, and biodiversity. So for the collection of material, we were having during my master a big project with 4 different professors and 1 economist. All of this big project was to promote conservation to farmers in Alabama. And we had different groups there, North, Central, and South. But as I was located in Auburn, we selected farmers in the Central Alabama. So we selected 5 farmers for the results. However, I had interviews with much more farmers, and we selected them based on their crop rotation. And in the beginning, we wanted that they were involved, that they had irrigation to be able to analyze this impact. However, it didn't work as we expected, because as we were taking data from the past, farmers don't tend to change methods. They usually follow kind of a recipe. A lot of them, not all of them, but they follow a recipe for their production, their growing season. So we were not seeing difference in things there. but I set up individual interviews that usually used to take 2 hours because we were collecting data from 3 years, 19, 20, and 21. And sometimes I had to have more than one interview with them because it's hard for them to give us time, depending on the time of the year. They usually are very busy, but we used that instead of comparing the same field in different years, we changed the approach and we compare different fields with the same crop, but different practices to see how their fields were differing with the scores and what they were doing different on that. And we used all of this to present on field days. And during my time there, we presented in 2 field days. So in these 2 slides, I'm showing all the data that we collect with the farmer, and it's a lot of data. And I know that we need that, but this were one of the things that was it was a barrier with the farmers in the interviews. So we had to be very efficient in collecting the data, so the farmers didn't get overwhelmed with a lot of questions and a lot of informations. And how I wasn't getting information throughout the current growing season, it was a little hard as well because I wasn't there to see what they were doing. So farmers also, the ones that I interviewed, at least just one of them, they had record of their operations. The other ones, they were giving me information based on their memory. So this is something that it was a barrier for me as well, because putting the information in the calculator, I noticed some weird things, or things were not being putting together well. And I was calling them or scheduling another interview to go over again some metrics, some data, and they changed some information. They used to tell me different things and I was getting confused. So the communication part and the lack of record keeping was a little hard. And also, even though I had my degree in agriculture, agronomy in Brazil, and then here I did my master in Auburn with agriculture, for me, the rotation part of the calculator was very hard. So I had to do and redo a lot of times, talk with people from field to market to understand better that. So I feel like even us that we have a degree on those, it's a little hard. I imagine that for farmers, it's even harder. So I think it's a great calculator, but it's a good way for teaching and for us to use within the farmer, but not them by themselves. But this was hard, especially because of the lack of record keeping. And the part of the fertilizer too was very hard because we have a lot of ways to input this data. Type of fertilizer, rate, percentage, amount in pounds per acre or ounce. So once I asked the farmers, each of them used to answer in a different way. Sometimes they didn't understand exactly. I used to ask rate, they answered in percentage, or I asked in percentage, they answered in amount, things like that. And sometimes they don't even know exactly the product that they are applying because they contract someone to deal with this kind of things for them. So it was a little hard, this part. But going to the results, for the water quality and energy that I analyzed, we chose a cornfield in 2021, comparing farmer 14 and 22. And they had different management practices here. So farmer 14 was doing conventional tillage, no use of cover crop, applying a lot of nitrogen, and yeah, we were asked about this several times, this amount of nitrogen, even in the field days by other farmers. But we talked a lot with this farmer, and he said it was right, this amount, because he was doing variable rate application, and in some areas he was applying a lot, and in other areas not that much. And he applied as well more protectant products than farmer 22. And farmer 22, we see that it does strip till, cover crop, and split his fertilizer application more times. And here we see the difference. Farmer 22 that has more sustainable practices could mitigate 2 pathway out of 4. And farmer 14 could mitigate just 1 pathway out of 4. And that is especially because farmer 22 split the application of nitrogen. This is very important for water quality, and the use of cover crop as well, the tillage method. This is gonna be very important for water quality. So the field sensibility here means things that we can't change in the field, like the soil texture and slope. And the pathway ratio is things that we can change. So the nutrient application and tillage, which is this that we need to focus on how, what we can do depending on the field sensibility to improve their score in the water quality. And for the energy use, we see that what impacted the most was the fertilizer energy. And we see that the farmer 14, his fertilizer energy is much higher than farmer 22. That's because he applied more fertilizer. But doesn't mean the fertilizer energy, doesn't mean the application of the fertilizer, but the production of that fertilizer. The same for protectant energy, which was higher too for farmer 14 than farmer 22, as he used 8 products and the farmer 22 used just 5 projects. And another different thing here is the management energy. In the farmer 22, we have a higher management energy, and that's because farmer 22 had some more operations in the field as he planted cover crop, so he needs to go to the field to plant. To terminate cover crop, he went to the field to apply lime, different than farmer 14 that didn't apply it. He splitted his fertilizer more time than farmer 14. So this increased his management energy, but it still didn't make him have a higher total energy use if compared to farmer 14. For the soil carbon and soil conservation, we used just one field to do this analysis because it's unfair to compare these metrics with different soils and different weathers, different soil texture and slopes, altitudes. So everything is going to impact, all of these things are going to impact the soil. So we did a simulation with that field. So this farmer is originally, he does originally conventional tillage, disc 2 times, and we see how that impacted the soil carbon. The number here is negative 0.47, which means if it's lower than 0, between 0 and less 1, means that he has higher chance to lose soil carbon in the soil. And also we see that he's losing 2 tons of soil per acre in that field, which if we don't have a comparison, we don't understand how this is big or not. But comparing to the simulation, which we changed just the tillage method, simulating him doing strip tillage, we see that the soil carbon changed to a positive number, showing that he has higher chance to gain soil carbon in that field, and he is losing less tons of soil per acre. He's losing now 0.7. So this was really nice to show them in the field. They interact and they question things about this. And here for the greenhouse gas emission, we are comparing the farmer 71 and 17 on cotton fields in 2019. And the farmer 71, it was what we saw for the soil conservation and soil carbon. And farmer 17, he does strip tillage. Both of them does cover crop. One of them the farmer 17 doesn't do irrigation, and they have different ways to apply fertilizer. And farmer 71 had more trips to the field. And this is going to impact their greenhouse gas emissions results. So the main difference in their emissions were primarily to do application, followed by post-harvest and management energy. Post-harvest emissions are influenced by factors such the mileage from the field to the point of sale, the type of fuel used by transportation, and the drying process. And since farmer 71 used conventional tillage, applied more fertilizer, and had more fuels to the trip, the greenhouse gas emissions were expected to be higher. And implementing practices that reduce soil tillage can decrease soil disturbance, microbial activity, and lower down the CO2 and N2O emissions rate. So talking about the challenge and opportunity, I already talked a little throughout the presentation, but the challenges was the effective communication. I put it here, the presenting outcomes, but it was also to collect the data. So we need to understand very well the whole process of the season and the production to be able to do the right questions with them and to present the outcomes. During the field day, we had to be very careful on how to present the data, because a lot of some of them can be tied to politics in the farmer's view, and also they can get shut down and don't want to listen to you anymore or don't want to be there. So you need to be careful on how to presenting. And also in the energy use, we wanted to be more visual, the outcomes. So we translated the BTU per acre to gallons per acre. And as I said in the beginning, not in my thesis, but in the field day, all of our results were shown with the economics of different practices as well, so they could see the impacts of the economic on their practices. And the data outcome accuracy, because as I said, it's hard for farmers to have a record keeping or looking at a record keeping to show you, or want to show you, I don't know, fertilizer receipts, that would be much easier for me to get that information to put in the calculator instead of understanding what they are answering. Are they understanding how I'm asking those? And that impact the outcome of the data as well. So besides that, we have a lot of opportunity to use the Fieldprint calculator and the data. So we can use as engagement to that day. Those few days were really nice. We used games to involve farmers. We put some blanket parts on the panels there so they could answer what they think it had in each farm, what each farmer was doing different to have those results, and use that as educational tools in the extension. And it is what I'm want to do here in the extension in Nebraska. I'm planning to use this next year, maybe. And as this tool give us concrete insights and numbers that we can look, this make farmers more comfortable to look that data and those practices and say, okay, I think I can use that. I think I can try that, because he's seeing the results of those. So in those few days, just wrapping up, allowing side-by-side comparison, help us to engage farmers actively and use that as educational tools. And the water quality, we saw that could be improved by minimizing soil disturbance, planting cover crops, and applying fertilizing following the 4 hours. The energy use can be improved by applying fertilizer following the 4 hours as well. Transitioning from conventional tillage to strip tillage had impact on soil erosion and increased soil carbon and reducing soil erosion, improving as well the greenhouse gas emissions. And the benchmarks can motivate farmers to embrace sustainable practices. We notice that they tend to be very competitive with their neighbors, and they get very curious and engaged with that, wanting to see what they are doing different to have those different numbers. And that's why having the numbers describing the metrics is so important. So if you have any questions, I'm here, or if you want to send me an email later too.
Great, thank you so much, Marina. Thank you for sharing your contact information with the audience.
Sure.
So please do enter your questions in the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen. I have some questions, Marina. As a former extension person myself, I have a great love for extension, and it's just so great to hear you highlight the value of extension in this work. As we know, every state has a land-grant university with extension. Funding varies tremendously from state to state, but this is a really important resource, I think, for projects to get involved with. Reach out to your local extension office to make those connections. And so you talked a bit about farmer trust and responding and sort of their concerns about privacy. Like, they don't necessarily want to show how much they paid for fertilizer, and the problem with record keeping. So do you think there's some things that we can do to help build trust with farmers to make them more comfortable to share that information? Do you have any suggestions for that?
So I don't know if I have the best answer, but building this trust with farmers, I think it starts with normal talks and going to their field and asking them how they like to do, instead of trying to change something right away. So I don't like to tell them, okay, so don't you want to put cover crop here? I just ask, do you do cover crop, and why you do or why you don't do it? But have you seen some issues with cover crop, or have you tried? But I don't start right away telling them why you don't do it, like this kind of things. And as I said, having those interviews with them, I like it to show first how the calculator works and how the data is presented, so they can understand how is going to be the final result, and they see that it's not showing something that is going to impact their lives and it's just a field. It's not going to be the entire farm or something like that. I explained that their name is not going to be shared, but some of them, they were trusting a lot already in the extension. They used to do works already with extension, so they accepted even I taking pictures and showing that I was having interviews with them in my Facebook. And when they saw the picture of other people, they were like, "Oh, I saw you were to see that person. How is him? Is he doing better than me? I bet I'm better." But so some of them were more trust, they trust more. I think because they are more time working with those, with extension and with the university. But some of them were more conservative. But I think it takes time, and takes time talking, but we need to start somewhere. So yeah, I think it's that.
I think all of our work depends on trust, right? We have to trust each other.
And takes time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that takes time, and that's really challenging.
Yeah.
Somebody, an anonymous poster just made a suggestion that the most important thing to build a relationship is to build the right relationship and learn from the grower about what they do and why they do it. Because they know their
Mhm.
best, and gathering information there should actually be paid for. So have you ever had the opportunity to compensate farmers for their time, or what do you think about that approach if the money was available?
I think they would be more interested. But yeah, my project, I couldn't pay anything for them. And right now, I don't have any compensation either.
Yeah.
And I think it's harder maybe in the extension. Is not all projects that can be, even if I have a fund, it doesn't mean that I can compensate farmers. It depends a lot. So this is hard. So but I think it would make a difference.
So there's a great opportunity for partnership there,
Yeah.
where if another organization who is allowed to give gifts, which in extension universities, you're not supposed to give gifts, which I guess that's would be
Yes.
considered, that if you had that support from an outside organization that could help do that, that would really strengthen
Yeah.
that relationship and provide some incentive for them to share that.
Yeah. Because this is their way to gain life, this is their work, so it's all about money too for them. Yeah. And yeah.
And another just kind of affirmation from a poster that farmers are researchers just like university folks, right? And he said you start with a part of the land, not the whole farm, not everything, but just a section
Yeah.
of it built for that experimentation. We know farmers are always doing experimentation on their
Exactly.
property. This has been very informative. Please, folks that are listening, be sure to get to know your local extension office and who's there, and work beside them to get this work done.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Marina. We really
Thank
appreciate
you for the opportunity too.
All right, so now we'd like to introduce Danielle Isaacson. Thank you so much, Danielle. We're really looking forward to hearing about economics. Another, Dr. Prokopy has talked about social, Marina's talked about agronomic, and so glad for you to round out that sustainability discussion with some talk about farmer economics. So please take it away. Perfect.
All right, thank you. Everything look okay?
Great.
All right, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Kelly. Thanks for having me here. Again, my name is Danielle Isaacson. I work at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, and I'm really excited to be here today to share about some of the work that we've been doing looking at the economics of agricultural conservation practices. So just kind of starting off here, kind of laying the groundwork. This work is obviously a coming together of both detailed financial data along with conservation agriculture. And so we started off with that financial data through the Minnesota Farm Business Management Program and the FinBin database, which I'll share a little bit more about. In 2023, that database had over 2,300 farms in Minnesota available for analysis. And within that, we have an environmental cohort. And these are individuals that are in that database who are also enrolled in the Minnesota Water Quality Certification Program. And so we've partnered with AgCentric and the Minnesota State Ag Centers of Excellence for 5 years now to report out annually on this environmental cohort and analyze their data as compared to the full database for Minnesota. And spoiler alert, we have been able to find that producers who are water quality certified, a part of that environmental cohort, do seem to have a management style that's really enhancing profitability, and they've been outperforming their peers for 5 years in a row. So that's what we'll be sharing a little bit more about today. Starting off with our financial data. So Farm Business Management is a program that's available in many states all around the US here. It's a one-on-one student-led program that's really designed to help the farmer student in both their financial and business management. In Minnesota, instructors and students use the FinPact software for their farm business management analysis, and that annual data then is recorded in the FinBin database. And this is offered to Minnesota producers through the Minnesota State College system. So the FinBin database is a really powerful database that can generate an endless number of custom reports. It's one of the largest and most accessible sources of farm financial and production benchmark information in the world, and has data from over 50,000 producers. That data, of course, is contributed by farm management education programs that use that FinPact software for their analysis. And I'll also just note that FinPact, that software is developed and supported by the Center for Farm Financial Management in Minnesota. Apologies, little tech error on my side. And so as part of this, it's really a really opportunity to have this powerful data. Right here, I have just a sample of what one of the reports look like that comes out of the FinBin database. And this is just soybean costs and returns by tillage system. So there's so many different ways that this data can be reported out, both in custom and kind of standard reports. So moving on to talk about our environmental cohort. So I'm going to take a few slides here to share about this group of producers and why they are so well suited to serve and represent kind of that environmental cohort in this work. And so these producers are certified through the Water Quality Certification Program in Minnesota. And this program is a historic partnership of local, state, federal government and private industry that came together to establish a voluntary conservation program in Minnesota to support and recognize producers, and was signed into Minnesota state statute back in 2013. The program provides whole farm planning for water quality, which includes risk assessment of every parcel and every crop in the operation. It pairs producers with a locally based certification professional that works with them to develop site-specific solutions to mitigate any risks for water quality that might be found on the operation. Unique to this program, part of the statute piece as well is that it offers regulatory certainty to producers. And so through a 10-year contract between the state and the producer, they will be deemed in compliance with any new state level rules or laws relating to water quality for the term of their certification. And then to date, there are over 1,500 producers that have been water quality certified, and they manage over 1 million acres across the state. And then taking a look at really what it takes to become water quality certified and how that, kind of serves this environmental cohort in our work. It is that one-on-one certification process with an agronomy and conservation accredited professional. They work together through an assessment tool, but then also kind of walking the fields to identify risks to water quality, and then any risks that are identified, what the options would be for that producer to mitigate the practices based on their operation, right? So it's site specific and customized. I have a little list here of just everything that goes into our assessment tool and our considerations through the water quality certification process. It's physical field properties, nutrient management, tillage management, pest, irrigation, drainage, conservation practices, you name it. Certification is kind of this thorough look through the operation. Through the life of the program, producers have voluntarily implemented over 3,000 new best management practices in order to achieve certification, so not including any practices they may have already been doing. And some of those practices and BMPs include everything, right, from nutrient management to cover crops to grass waterways and rotational grazing that go in. So it's not looking at just a single practice, but it's that whole system of practices that are needed to protect water quality. And of course, cover crops and grass waterways are also great for other environmental benefits outside of water quality, right? Soil health and numerous other co-benefits from these practices. Just going to wrap up here with a quick note that once certified, producers do receive a handful of benefits from the state. Of course, regulatory certainty is an important piece of that. Recognition is also really a founding part of the certification program, providing a field sign and that opportunity for producers to show their community, their neighbors, that they are doing everything they can to protect water quality on their farm and through their work. We, of course, have that one-on-one technical assistance. We have some dedicated program funding through grants and RCPP that it provides financial assistance. A lot of folks do say that they just like the checkup and validation of the process, going through this assessment process, seeing the results, meeting with that one-on-one with that certifier is just a process that's really beneficial for them as they think about how they're managing their operation. And then lastly, there is branding and marketing opportunities for those folks who might want to use the logo on their CSA box or something like that. Okay, so now we are going to dive into the report, which has shown, as I've mentioned, that these water quality certified farms in the environmental cohort are showing a higher profitability. The report is called The Influence of Intensified Environmental Practices on Farm Profitability, and the data for it and the report is also published by AgCentric in Minnesota and also the Minnesota State Agricultural Centers of Excellence. The report's been published for 5 years in a row now, so starting in 2019 for the 2019 growing season. And it compares the financial and crop production data from water quality certified farms in that cohort to non-certified farms. So this slide is showing some of the demographic data that we have as part of that report. The pie charts here, you can see these are examples of the environmental cohort as compared to the average group in our 2023 growing season analysis. You see here that they are there's a pretty similar makeup of farm types in each of these groups, with the exception of livestock. So it does show that folks in the environmental cohort, there are more livestock operations, and especially dairy. It makes up a big chunk of that, which we'll take a closer look in a few slides here. Looking down at the table below, that shows the demographics of these two groups. And so one column is kind of the 5-year average over those 5 years of looking at this data. And then we have our 2023 growing season. And you can see the number of farms there. In 2023, we had 126 farms in the environmental cohort and just over 2,300 in our database, in the database that they're compared to. You see kind of the crop acres per farm, so the sizes are fairly similar. You can see the age of the operator, which is interestingly very consistent at about 48 or 47 for both of these groups. They're years farming, so they're experienced farming. And then also we kind of pulled out and took a look at how many of those folks were beginning farmers. Just kind of generally, the database has expanded since we started in 2019. We had 53 in our environmental cohort, and then now we're up to 126, and are happy to see that number grow each year. And just overall kind of summary for our demographic data that we have is that these two groups cohorts are represent a pretty similar demographic. So these tables are just kind of a small snippet of the data from the report, but focusing in on kind of the income statement and the balance sheet. And so on our income statement table, you see, I kind of just highlighted there the gross cash farm income, and then the average net farm income, median net farm income. So you can see that comparing at that 5-year average level, how the environmental cohort group is in all those categories is kind of outperforming that database average, specifically kind of throwing out a $25,000 higher average net farm income on average for that group. We also have kind of our balance sheet over on the other side, looking at that total asset, total liability, and net worth for the two different groups over the 5-year average. Again, where we see that environmental cohort outperforming. On this slide, I'm highlighting our livestock data from the report. And so it shows the, well, as we saw earlier, the environmental cohort generated more income from livestock than the database average. And here I am highlighting some selected factors from the dairy enterprise report. There were a significant number of dairy operations within that livestock chunk. And this has been looked at specifically for 3 years in a row now, 2021, 22, and 23. And throughout this table, you can see I highlighted right here shows the net return per cow for each of those years between the two groups. But looking kind of just down all of these select factors, the environmental cohort did have the advantage with all of them except for feed cost per cow, which is interesting. And just kind of averaging out these 3 years, the net return per dairy cow for between 2021 and 2023 was about $702 for the environmental cohort, and then about $310 for the database average. And then lastly, on this slide here, just another way to kind of visualize in a graph form some of that dairy data, looking at net return per cow and also number of cows, which is interesting. The environmental cohort, which is the green line here, did have a higher herd size. And so you can just see over the years, of course, how variable the economy and the market is each year, but then also just how those two groups sort of track together with kind of their returns and total number of herd size. So with that, I again want to reiterate, I shared a very select bit of data here, and there is so much more both in the report and then also in that FinBin database. And so kind of what I shared here today and kind of the conversations we're having, you know, with our team at the department and with our colleagues, why is this happening, right? Like why, how do we explain this? And so our, the short answer is our college partners have yet to really find a definitive, clear factor or trend to explain this. However, as published in this last report, we have producers they producers who achieve water quality certification do seem to have a management style that enhances their profitability. And so kind of some things that we suspect and are thinking about include just that alignment of a holistic financial and farm management perspective, right? These producers go through the water quality assessment process and are certified. They also are in the farm business management program, working one-on-one with an instructor on that side, looking at their financials and how they manage their farm. So bringing that together just makes it a really high performing producer. We also look at and think about how conservation practices are profitable when they are managed in that whole farm system, as opposed to looking at a single practice. And so we have seen some data that, looking at single practice, whether it's incorporating no-till or incorporating cover crops, and how when you don't look at the full picture of the farm and only look at that one practice, it's a lot more variable. But when you zoom out to the whole farm, we see that, they're a whole farm from that perspective. They are really seeing some financial profit from that. So the idea between systems versus a single practice. We also think about that improved farm resiliency for some of these producers to extreme weather, and improved soil health as part of that picture. Here in Minnesota, we had 3 consecutive years of drought, followed by this year with a ton of rain and flooding. And so folks are seeing some extreme weather, and anything you can do in terms of conservation practices to increase resiliency helps the whole farm. And then I'll just share that the annual report, we plan to continue putting out this report, and our partners over at the colleges are excited to do some more further analysis of specific crop enterprises, take some deeper dives in those spaces, as well as livestock, to try and see if there's some specific reason why the livestock groups are so different. Very lastly here, I just wanted to share a quick shout out to Field to Market. The Water Quality Certification Program has been a member since 2018, and we have had the opportunity to highlight some of our producers and advisors through the Spotlight series, and also did host a project as well back in 2019, where we were looking at water quality, soil health, and climate smart practices. And through that project, it was interesting. We kind of looked at both the water quality assessment tool outputs along with the Fieldprint calculator, and so measured improvements over time, and kind of looked at the data that came out of both of those calculators for our producers. And we're happy that we were able to show both soil loss, soil carbon, and water quality metric improvement over each year with that project. So with that, I'll wrap up here. Thank you so much. I included a QR code here just for the webpage where you can find all of those reports that I was referencing. They're available on Agcentric's website. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Danielle. Thank you again for sharing the link to the report. Hope everybody got a chance to get a look at it. And if you have any questions for Danielle on this work, please put them in the Q&A box. But I have some questions. First off, I just really want to give kudos for this work. We get asked all the time, when we talk about sustainability and farmers implementing practices and transitioning to more sustainable agronomic work in their farm, people want to know what's the cost, and getting a hold of this financial data is so difficult. So FinBin is just, it blows my mind, right? 50,000 producers have entered their data, so that's a really robust data set. Who can access FinBin?
Yeah, it's publicly available. You can go on their website now and start generating reports, mix and match kind of what factors you want to highlight. Yeah, it's an impressive database, and very detailed too. But
it's limited to Minnesota. Is that the understanding?
So yes, so we do use it in Minnesota. Apologies, I'm not the biggest expert, but looking at their website, you do see there are a handful of other states that are partners and use the FinPack software. So that's the software that leads to the database. And so that software kind of does the input. And so there are other farm business management programs around the US that do contribute there and are a part of it. So yeah, I think it's perhaps the software piece that is kind of one of the gateways to entering the data. And so yeah, there isn't data for every state in there, but for a handful of states.
So it'd be great to see that expand. I mean, it'd be great to see the whole country with data in this program, right? So we can understand those costs associated. That's fascinating. And I really was taken by this idea that when they get the certification, the water quality certification, that's 10-year compliant regulatory certainty, which must take a little load, because we know Minnesota's at the top of the Mississippi River watershed, and what happens up there has cascading effects all the way down. So that farmers can kind of, once they get that certification, they know that they're doing their part to help protect the watershed. That's really, really interesting. So can you, I was really taken too by this idea that if you look at individual practices, it doesn't really tell the whole story. But if you look at that holistic, like what made you all decide that, like looking at that, do you want to talk a little bit about like how you made that realization that, whoa, if you just look at cover crops, it doesn't seem to make a difference. But if you look at the whole farm, there's something synergistically happening here. Can you just talk about what that was like, or maybe elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. No, and yeah, I think you're spot on there. And so we started this kind of partnership with the Farm Business Management Program here in Minnesota back in 2019 to just look at water quality certified farms, right? They added certification as one of the fields that you can put into the database, and then we're able to sift those out, right? And so we really didn't know what we were going to see in 2019, right? We hadn't done this kind of financial analysis of the producers at that point. And so, that first year we were really excited about the results showing that. And so over the years, I think they might be in their third year now, some other initiatives have popped up in Minnesota, one looking at cover crops specifically, and highlighting producers who implement cover crops and are also a part of that farm business management program, have their data accessible in that way. And so that's, I think there's a few other, I think there's an organic one, and there's a few other sorts that are coming out since we've started doing this work with farm business management, with other folks seeing just this opportunity. And so the cover crop report, when you're looking at a specific practice, it doesn't always it's hard to take into account, the variability of the season, right? That weather change really affects some of these practices. And so I'm not sure that report specifically for cover crops has shown exactly at what point do you start getting your return on investment? At what point does that start paying off for you at the cover crop level? But when, a lot of certified producers do cover crops, they also do all these other practices. And so when it's a part of a system, there seems to be a way that, it's different when it's a part of a system and it reflects a positive financial outcome. So yeah, it's been a really enjoyable process for us to look at this, and we are excited every year to see what the results are going to be. And yeah, so we'll have another one out next spring.
Fantastic. That, emphasizing that systems approach, that really, when I came to Field to Market, I heard that from a number of sources. Our friends are with the American Society of Agronomy. They constantly talked about taking a systems approach to sustainability, looking at that larger picture, that holistic approach, because just like we're not just our heart or our brain, but we're all the systems working together. The same thing on farms. This is very validating, I think, for a lot of people that are listening to you today. And thank you to Carrie Vollmer-Sanders, the new president of Field to Market, for sharing that FinBin. There's about 13 states who have the FinPack software available to farmers. So that's great to hear that it's expanding. And so Katrina just posted the link to FinBin in the chat box. And I also wanted just to remind everybody that we will be in Minnesota this November. Field to Market's plenary meeting is going to be in Minneapolis, as will the Sustainable Agriculture Summit in Minneapolis. So if you have a chance to meet Danielle and some of her colleagues from up north and talk about some of this really exciting work that's happening, and maybe learn some lessons about the the water quality certification program going on in Minnesota. That's really fascinating. I'm going to pop up just our last slide. Thank you so much again for sharing this with us. Let's see if I get the right one up. See if I can do it. Can I do it? Are we good? Can we see it? Okay. So again, I'm going to just thank everybody for sharing your time today. If you have any questions, please reach out to me or any other field and market staff. We can connect you with our speakers. Hopefully you've got their QR codes and their email addresses, but we can help amplify that if you missed it. If you are interested in participating in our next research showcase, please reach out to me. We want to really amplify this important work that's going on among our membership. So please, I put my email address up there on the screen. And with that, we're going to close the webinar and thank you again to our speakers and all of you for being with us today.